What are the consequences of the big, beautiful tax and spending bill about to be enacted by Congress? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you all the principled case for the libertarian philosophy. We've been doing that for about 35 years here at FFF. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who was vice president of academic affairs when the Future of Freedom Foundation got founded in 1989. Richard, good to see you again.
It's good to see you and to be with our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, let me remind them who you are. Professor of Economics at the Citadel, former president of the Foundation for Economic Education, former Ludwig von Mises Professor of Economics at Hillsdale College, former professor of economics at University of Dallas, where we first met.
That's right.
All right, Richard, we got a big, beautiful bill coming out of Congress. Well, that's the term that they've put on it. It deals with spending. And, I don't want to be an I told you so, Richard, but, I said from the very beginning that nothing's going to change fundamentally when Trump's elected president. That, okay, yeah, you got the Department of Governmental Efficiency to make government more efficient, downsize USAID or Department of Education. But in terms of the overall welfare warfare state and massive out of control federal spending and debt and regulations and so forth, that nothing was going to change. And when you look at the big, beautiful spending bill that is going through Congress, it looks like it's going to be enacted, it proves my point that you've got spending going out through the roof, federal spending. Well, we've got a debt of almost $37 trillion now. That is not going to be cut. That's going to be increased. I don't know how much it's going to be increased, but at least by $1 trillion. And overall federal spending under the Trump administration is not being reduced. And one of the real ironies here is that Elon Musk, who was appointed to head up the Department of Governmental Efficiency, DOGE, and who made this big hullabaloo about downsizing USAID and Department of Education and making departments more efficient and so forth, he himself is now criticizing this big, beautiful bill on the very grounds that it is just same old stuff, out of control spending. And really what's going on here is that any savings that Musk might have brought about or did bring about by downsizing USAID or cutting funding for whatever, NPR or whatever, or Voice of America, is more than made up with out of control spending in other areas. And I said this was going to happen. That if you look at the military, for example, the Trump is offering them, I think, more than $1 trillion now. And then when you look at all the immigration enforcement, the deportation efforts and stuff, federal expenditures are soaring there. So you can say, oh, well, look, he's reduced spending over here. But if he's increased spending fivefold or tenfold over here, what difference does it make in terms of the overall spending level? And the fact is that it has all the appearance of Trump having lost the war against the Washington, D.C. establishment, and so did Musk. When Musk left the DOGE, you almost had the appearance that he was saying, I'm done. I have fought hard for 6 months, but I lost. And the welfare warfare state bureaucracy ended up winning this war. And that's why I have maintained for umpteen years that the problem is not getting a better president to manage or run this program, that inevitably every president gets enveloped in this system. The deep state has won this thing. Notice that Trump is not only not talking about even reducing a little bit the military spending, he's actually increasing. But remember, we heard a lot of diatribes against the CIA. He's not talking about abolishing the CIA anymore. NSA, he's made peace with them the same way he did He's made peace with the deep state the same way he did in his first term in office. We're all back to normal here, as far as I'm concerned. The drug war he's continuing to wage with great ferocity. So it's what I've said from the very beginning that it's a system problem. That when Franklin Roosevelt brought in the welfare state, and it was amplified by Lyndon Johnson, and then they brought in the national security state, the warfare state, in the 1940s, the drug war, the war on immigrants. It is this entire system that's the problem. And until Americans confront that, they're going to keep having this delusion that if they just elect the man on the white horse, he's going to be able to rein all this in and make it work. He's going to be able to produce what Lyndon Johnson called the Great Society, which is this whole welfare warfare state. What do you think, Richard?
Well, Musk was absolutely right when he said the other day that the bill going through Congress can either be big or it can be beautiful, but it can't be both. And by beautiful, he meant a bill that actually took the bull by the horns and radically began the process of cutting departments, cutting expenditures in absolute terms, not just slowing down a rate of increase, as Republicans have often talked about in past administrations, but actual cuts. And the fact is that the Republicans in Congress, forget about the Democrats. Democrats have never seen a government program that they didn't like and wanted more money spent on. But the Republicans in Congress, the Republicans in the White House, from the president on down, basically do not believe in a smaller and freer economy. And in that situation, and given, as you're pointing out, the permanent embedded bureaucracy who exist from administration to administration as permanent members of the civil service, uh, who have their own agenda, their own ideological preferences, their own personal rice bowls of it is in their departments and their departments and bureau and agencies budgets. That is the means by which they have a job and a living and chances for promotions and an eventual government funded retirement. As long as these are the factors at work, nothing will change by just changing people in office. But that gets to another schizophrenia on the part of the American people. And that is there is a disconnect between costs and benefits. They see benefits that the government gives them. I have my Social Security. I have my Medicare, Medicaid. I have my unemployment insurance. I have now protection from foreign competitors, uh, since Trump now is an advocate of increasingly national self-sufficiency, a true dogmatic form of protectionism. I want these things, but what I don't want is to have to pay for them. I want the goodies without having to shell out the dough to pay for them, or at least not the full cost of what they entail. So people do not want to pay for these programs. So on the one hand, they resist the taxes to actually honestly and fairly have a tax burden reflecting the full cost of what the government is transferring from the Peters to the Pauls. And sometimes you're both Peter and Paul. Uh, and face the reality. Do you want to bear the full cost of this? Do you want your taxes to go up by over $2 trillion a year? That's the budget deficit. $2 trillion a year to have a balanced budget on what all these welfare redistributive programs really cost. They don't want that. They don't want that. And that's why nothing gets cut. And there's always the push to lower taxes or to keep taxes at their current level and not raise them. Uh, and that reflects another thing, that the people in the United States actually want government to do these things. It's not only, but it's my Social Security check. I put in my money for it, the fallacy of that. Or don't I have a right to health care? I'm an American. We're all in it together. Okay. That mentality is rampant in our country. And until there's an ideological change of what does it mean to be free, and what responsibilities of the free man are inescapable from personal liberty, and therefore a decision that government should not be doing these things, telling people how to live, supplying these things that should be the responsibility of individuals and their families themselves. And by a change in the climate of opinion of greater personal liberty and more personal responsibility, and the preference and the value of voluntary association as opposed to compulsory giving and taking, until that changes, not very much is going to change. It really captures the essence of how far this country has drifted, not just in terms of the programs, but the thinking of the population have drifted away from the founding ideals upon which the country was established, where government was viewed as something that could be potentially dangerous because of its ability to encroach upon your freedom, to seize your wealth, to dictate your life. And these concerns led to the idea of a limited and restrained government, checks and balances, divisions of powers, a Bill of Rights, and other constitutional elements that were meant to say government should do these things, but no more. Anything beyond that is an infringement of the citizens' liberty that would be the road to oppression rather than the preservation of freedom. That has been lost in far too many of our fellow citizens. And until that mind change shifts, and it's not an easy matter since people have gotten so used to it and dependent upon it, there will be no change. Because as you were saying, it's the system. But if people don't see the system as a problem, there's no one that you can elect that will see that the problem is taken away.
I completely agree with you. And I think Trump simply reflects the popular sentiment.
Yes.
He's not out there leading the way to bring this country to the restoration of sound economic and moral principles. Okay, now what am I talking about? Well, my favorite period in history is 1880 to 1910. Um, and it wasn't a perfectly libertarian panacea or anything like that. You had exceptions, Antitrust Act, Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. You had the Spanish-American War, but the exceptions are really statist measures that were being adopted. But this was a very unusual society. No Social Security, no Medicare, no income tax, IRS, Federal Reserve, paper money, drug laws, national security state, Pentagon, CIA, NSA, foreign military bases. I mean, I could go on and on. Phenomenally different uh, system than what we have today. And so there's a change in perception from the grandchildren of those people, those Americans that were living in that period of time where we want government to take care of us. And like you say, we want it to be free. We don't want to pay for it. We want the rich to pay for it. Well, I do a lot of commentaries on this website called Quora in the area of Social Security, and it perfectly reflects what you're saying. People there are saying, "Oh, are the Republicans going to cut my Social Security? This is outrageous. They're all seniors." So I'll weigh in there and say, "Well, no, of course not. The Republicans are not going to cut your Social Security. They believe in Social Security as much as the Democrats do, and Medicare too." But what we should do is abolish these programs, not cut them, but abolish them. Richard, they go ape. I mean, just go ape. Oh my gosh, how would people survive? There'd be people dying in the streets. And I come back and say, you see, this is what the system has done. It's destroyed people's faith in freedom and family and churches and voluntary charity, where people have this faith in Caesar and the IRS. And then a lot of them say, what you were suggesting, that I worked for 40 years and I put into the system. I'm just getting my money back. And I say, no, that's not what's happening here. Social Security is a welfare program, no different from food stamps. You are waging war against your children with the IRS. The IRS is seizing ever greater amounts out of your children's income to fund your retirement. And there is no compassion in this program because it's based on force. It's totally different from our ancestors' system where there was no Social Security and families took care of families. Uh, Same with Medicare. They go ballistic when I say this is a cancer on the body politic. It destroyed the finest healthcare system in history. Oh my gosh, there'll be people dying in the streets. Who will take care of the poor? Well, who took care of the poor before Medicare and Medicaid? Doctors did, hospitals did on a purely voluntary basis. They handled, in my hometown of Laredo, the doctor, which was the poorest city in the United States per capita income, on the border there with Mexico. Doctors' offices were filled, Richard, in the 50s and 60s, before Medicare and Medicaid, with poor people. Half of them couldn't pay their bill, and the doctors never turned away anyone. They treated them for free, and they were still very wealthy because they were making money off the people who could pay. And prices were so low and stable. Nobody had major medical insurance because they didn't need it. This is what people don't think about, is what the alternative to these socialist programs are all about. But as long as they have this faith in coercion, the IRS, government taking care of me, hear this also, take the money from the rich, as if there's no cost there. When you start taking from the rich, suddenly you start seeing rich people diminishing. Like the extreme, of course, is Castro's Cuba. They took from the rich there, and over time, they've nationalized all the big mansions and the businesses. So today, everybody's equal, but everybody's equally poor, desperately poor. And then you've got the national security state, which everybody thinks, oh my gosh, what would we do to keep us safe from the terrorists and the Muslims and the drug dealers and the illegals and who are invading America and the Russians and the Chinese? And so you've got this massive faith in this massive permanent military intelligence establishment that our ancestors warned us against. They strongly oppose these big standing armies. But everybody says, no, I'm willing to accept this to keep me safe and secure. So the nation is like imploding from within, I think. Now, we don't know when the end would come, but Richard, there's commentators now saying this debt is getting very precarious. You see this in the bond market, the long-term bond market with people on Wall Street. That's why Trump changed his mind on those tariffs on 70 countries, because the bond market was getting really jittery there, the long-term bond market. And those people got nervous. When I see Wall Street big figures getting nervous, that's when it's time to, uh-oh, what's going on here? So it's a very unstable system. We don't know when it will implode, but we do know that it can't go on forever.
Yeah. I just want to pick up on part of this theme that we talked about in reference to Trump. I think that one of the unfortunate aspects of this is that on the one hand, those on the left, who obviously dislike Trump for a whole variety of reasons, they view him as the advocate of capitalism. They view him as the person who wants to cut the taxes for the rich and burden the poor. So he's viewed as the worst of you if you allow the free enterprise system to go unshackled. But what is the reality? Now, it is true that Trump sometimes uses the rhetoric of free enterprise. Business is too heavily regulated. The Federal Register has to be cut back. Taxes on business are too high. We have to make the economy grow and the country to be great again. But the fact is that if you just go beneath the surface of that rhetoric, the fact is that he is a socialist central planner. He wants to tell businesses where they're to invest. He wants to tell businesses what industries America should have. He wants to tell the private sector where the jobs should exist and what types of jobs should be created and maintained. He wants to control the prices of pharmaceutical companies. He wants to tell universities that they can't accept foreign students because, as he put it, only more Americans should be accepted to Harvard, more Americans. So he's basically for affirmative action. He wants affirmative action for Americans to be higher proportion of Harvard accepted students than them damn foreigners. Damn foreigners. They're a threat to us. And by the way, in the worst tribalism, the sins of the father fall upon the son. That immigrant was a terrorist. Ergo, everyone from his nation, and particularly every family member of his, is a terrorist that's going to be kicked out. So the sins of the father fall upon the son. That's a premise that in the West, particularly in our legal system, we put behind us a very long time ago until Mr. Trump has decided to revive it. But the fact is that he has nothing to do with the free enterprise system. Free enterprise means that individuals have the latitude and the liberty to make their own choices as consumers and producers. What do I want to consume? Whom do I want to enter into an exchange with? What price am I willing to negotiate with this person that would be mutually beneficial and agreed to by both of us? Where shall I, as a businessman, invest my capital? What type of technologies? What part of the country might I open a factory or do so in another country because of the comparative benefits of this, viewing the world as a common trade area? What type of people would I like to have working in my firm, regardless of whether they're from country A or country B, with the skills and knowledge that would be most efficacious for me to be making the products that I anticipate consumers will want to buy in the features and qualities they're looking for at the most efficient and effective and competitive price I can offer it to do better than my rival who's also freely attempting to gain that same consumer business. Trump doesn't want people to have that liberty. He doesn't want them to have that freedom. He takes the collectivist idea that America has its own interests, very tribalistic notion. America must have these industries. America must have these types of jobs. America must be protected from these bad people. And anyone who disagrees with me, because I somehow have this clairvoyant power, this supernatural capacity to know what it means for America to be great and what it should be looking like once it's there, introduced by me and my policies. And anyone who disagrees with me demonstrates that he hates America. Because to disagree with my agenda shows that you don't really care or love or are concerned about your country. The arrogance, the hubris, the contempt for all others in the country that this demonstrates. He is a tyrant in his way of thinking. I don't mean in the sense that he has made himself a Mussolini. Fortunately, our system still has enough checks and balances that the courts and other institutions bounce him off the walls and prevents him from doing all of the extreme arbitrary and capricious policies that he'd like to introduce in an erratic way day by day. But his mindset, the way he thinks about the country, the way he views himself, and the role he sees himself playing as president is that of a tyrant who is going to take the country where he thinks it should go, whether the citizens of that country want to go there or not.
Yeah, because he identifies himself as America.
Yes,
I mean, if you disagree with him, you don't believe in America.
correct.
Uh, now you made a point about this big beautiful bill. People are criticizing him because he's got these tax cuts for the rich and so forth. But there's some merit to the critique because he, at the same time as having these tax cuts for the rich, he's got these tariffs,
Yes,
which are really taxes on the poor. I mean, we all know that a sales tax, which is what a tariff is a regressive tax. It falls disproportionately on poor people, on lower middle class people, even to a certain extent, middle class people. Not to mention the fact that the trade restrictions are bankrupting a lot of small businesses that they can't make it. And you see story after story about this. And yet this is all part of his system. And I'm sure what he's thinking is, well, if people go out of business, we can put them on welfare. That's what he did the first time around when he was president, when his policy on tariffs against China bankrupted American farmers. They could no longer sell their goods to China, the agriculture goods. So he developed this massive welfare program and said, send them a check. Well, okay, that replenishes their coffers, But who wants to be on welfare, Richard? As compared to having a farm and producing your crops and self-sufficient and selling them and so forth. To me, there's no comparison of making, $500,000 by selling your crops and $500,000 in a welfare check. Uh, so the whole thing is just really perverse. But it goes back to this notion that I don't think that Trump's the problem here. If Vance was the president or Kamala Harris was the president, nothing would change fundamentally. It'd be the same situation: out of control federal spending, out of control debt. Another thing that I think is worth mentioning on this bond market, that when the when that long-term interest rate is soaring and the value of the bond is plummeting, that means more interest that they have to pay on the national debt. So the problem starts compounding after a certain point. Um, I think it's just a systemic problem. And of course, this is what you and I do. This is what we've done for 35 years here at FFF, is try to get people to reevaluate these systems. The reason I mentioned that period, 1880 to 1910, is that, to me, those Americans, and they were, of course, building on what had happened before then. This was sort of the culmination of that principle of economic liberty, with the horrible exception of slavery, of course, in the 19th century. But they pointed the way to the trajectory. Americans really did discover the cause for alleviating or ending poverty. I mean, the prosperity in that period of time soared, real income soared, and not because of inflation, because there was no inflation. They had gold and silver as their money. They wouldn't have paper money. And then the greatest outburst of voluntary charity. If Americans had not abandoned that system and had maintained that trajectory, it boggles the mind to where we would be today in terms of standard of living and sound money and so forth. And so that's what I think the only thing we can keep doing, Richard. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it. On keeping this system, welfare state, warfare state, drug war, war on immigrants, and so forth. Well, okay, there's nothing we can do except keep saying this is going to be the consequences of your system, and to be prepared to take responsibility for those consequences.
Well, I just wanted, on a slightly more upbeat note, uh, there's a phrase, it always seems darkest before the dawn. That's a phrase. It always seems darkest before the dawn. It's very easy to deduce or conclude that a trend that you're on is irreversible. But there are numerous times in history, I've mentioned this before in previous or casts, that there were times in early periods that it seemed as if everything was going smoothly, it could only keep getting better, and a disaster happened. And then you enter into a disaster, and the Friends of Freedom say it's the end of liberty, government cannot be changed. It's all going to be totalitarian, either communist or fascist, like in the 1930s. And it didn't turn out quite that bad. And a lot of people took that attitude in the 1990s. Well, the Cold War is over, America won, the commies lost. It's the end of history, to quote Francis Fukuyama. It's only democratic capitalism from now on. But it hasn't turned out that way either. And just because the trends seem to be bad, both ideologically and fiscally, does not mean that there's not the ability for it to be reversed. Ideas have consequences. Everything that happens in the human circumstance is due to ideas, good or bad. And as long as there is a high degree of freedom of speech and the opportunity for ideas to be debated, exchanged, argued about, and rethought, there's always the possibility and there's always the strong likelihood that the trend will veer away from the train wreck that we seem to be heading towards.
Absolutely. And the way I figure it, Richard, is that if bad ideas, you point out that bad ideas have power too. If bad ideas could lure those later generations of Americans in the 30s, and to a certain extent in the 20s, and then later into the 40s, the 60s, to switch over from a good system, a solid system, to a bad system, why can't the reverse happen? Where a critical mass of people says, you know, those libertarians are right. We don't need government to be forcing us to be good, caring, and compassionate. Where children suddenly say, Dad and Mom, if we got rid of the income tax, that'd be a huge pay increase for me. Look how much I'm paying the IRS. I'm willing to help you guys out. If you guys get in trouble, I'm willing to help you out. Now you're talking about real, genuine charity. There are few things more gratifying in life than to help your parents out when they get desperate and in need of help. It's your way of paying back and saying thank you for what you did for me. But doing it through the IRS and the Social Security Administration, there's no gratification there. But I think it requires this restoration of principles. The nice thing is that we have a period that we can point to say, hey, look, this isn't utopia. This is a real life period where Americans adopted this kind of way of life. It's like this tiny little ray of light throughout history that shines in that one period of time that says, hey, this is what you can do. It's possible, and build on it. And who knows, Richard, you reach a critical mass of people that say, we want the good ideas back. And all of a sudden you see things starting to shift. And that's what you and I do. And you can't affect the outcome. You have no control over the outcome. You only have control over your message. But that's why we continue to put out this principled message with the faith and the hope that you can grab enough people to say, let's move this country in a better direction.
Yes.
All right. On that note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you all very much for tuning in. We're going to be taking a break next week. So you're going to have to do without Libertarian Angle next week, but we'll look forward to talking to you the following week. Richard, as always, enjoy the conversation, and I'll see you next time.
Until next time.